BuddyBox, I'm going to walk you through some of the materials in here and the instructions for making your buddy. So when you open up your box, you're going to see there's some instructions inside here, and I'm going to walk you through those today. You also are going to find a little baggie that has colorful embroidery thread in it, and you should have two googly eyes in case you want to glue some eyes rather than stitch eyes. That's a choice. You're going to have a bag of felt. So this material in here is called felt. It's really soft and easy to stitch and to cut. And you're going to have some fluffy stuffy that you're going to use to stuff your buddy. And then you should have a little bottle of glue just in case you need to glue down eyeballs. And then you've got a pair of scissors for cutting out your felt and for cutting embroidery thread. And then you also have a little baggie of lavender. One more thing I forgot to point out is that you should have a little needle stuck into your felt. So be really careful with that. It is pretty pointy, and the little hole in it is called the eye of the needle. That's going to come into play in just a minute here, but I'm going to go ahead and take that out. And we're going to take a look at these instructions. So number one, we've already done. That's unboxing your box, taking a look at all the materials that you've got. And then number two is planning your design. So just on a scrap piece of paper, doesn't matter, you're going to draw out what you want your little buddy to look like. And my cat is joining our tutorial here. Hi, Ula. And you're going to color it, thinking about the colors. These are your color choices for the different parts of your little critter that you're going to make. Now once you have drawn out your character and you've planned it out, you're going to cut out those pieces with felt. So I'm going to make my little buddy, I'm going to make him blue. So I'm going to pull my blue felt out. I'm going to cut out my pieces. These are the pieces here that I planned by looking here. I'm going to cut out a blue front and back for my little buddy. And I'm going to cut out little ear details, these little shapes inside the ears, little pink circles for the cheeks, and a little sniffy nose. I got to decide what color I want those to be. Now the easiest way to make sure that your front and your back are identical or matching pieces, I would use a Sharpie if you have one, or a pen. You could even use a piece of chalk, works great, or any marker that's pretty dark should show up on your felt, and draw out the shape that you want. Your scissors should be pretty sharp, and cutting out that felt isn't too tough. Take your time. I would not make your buddy much smaller than mine here, because remember, you're going to be adding little details and stitching, and the smaller it is, even though it's cute, it can get pretty tough. Okay, so now I've got my front of my buddy here. He needs a little trim. And then I'm actually going to trace this piece, and that's going to help me make sure that my two pieces are the same. So I'm going to trace it. Now when I stitch, I don't want all these black lines on my felt. So I'm going to make sure that the parts, the sides that have the black ink on them, are going to be the inside of my buddy. This will be the outside because that's the clean side. All right, so now I've got all my pieces cut out, and I'm done with step 3. So I'm going to move on to the next page here. Number 4 is threading your needle. Before you thread your needle, you may want your string to be longer than what you've got in your little baggie there. And you're going to notice, if you look at the end of these, that they're made of lots of little strings on the end all twisted together. So you can actually separate these out. I still like it to be pretty thick, so I'm just going to divide this in half. So I've got one strand of orange here, and one strand of orange here. So now I'm ready to thread my needle and make my knots. So I'm going to have 2 pieces of orange. So I've just doubled my length of orange so that I can stitch all the way around my little buddy. All right, so I'm going to make sure that I poke this all the way through. It may take a little bit of patience, a couple of tries. and then I'm going to make sure that I pull through a tail, okay? And that's this part right here that's sticking out on number 4. And then number 5, I'm going to knot my thread. So at the end of my thread, not in the middle, but all the way on the end here, I'm going to tie 3 knots together. So I'm going to tie a little knot in the end of my thread towards the end, okay, like that. You can see my little knot right there. And I'm going to add 2 more knots right on top of it. And this can be a little tricky, so take your time. I'm going to make another knot in my thread, but I'm going to make sure those 2 knots stack up on top of each other. And I'm not going to pull it too tight because I want them to be as big as possible. I'm going to do it one more time. Sometimes you might miss and have to do another one. So there I've got 3 knots all together really lightly, and I've got my tail. Now I went ahead and stitched on my pieces, okay? I found that my glue was not working super great, so I decided to stitch it on. You're welcome to try the glue. I'm also impatient and I don't like to wait for glue to dry, and I kind of like my little stitch design that I have on here. So I'm going to use my 2 pieces. Remember these marker pieces sides on here, and I want those to be on the inside of my project. So I'm going to put the 2 nice sides facing out and the 2 ugly sides that I drew on the inside. And I'm going to be stitching my buddy all the way around, but I'm going to leave one part open. I'm going to leave just a little bit open here so that I can stuff in his stuffing and his guts and his lavender before I seal him up. So here's my first piece of orange, and I've got my knot in the end, but I'm going to start my first stitch on the inside here. So just on that top piece, I started on the inside. I'm going to push that through. Before I pull this all the way, see I got my tail right here. I don't want my project or my thread to come unthreaded, so I'm going to make sure that I pinch my tail to my needle. So when I pull this nice and tight and it gets stopped by the knot there, that I'm not pulling my thread out of my needle. Now when I'm stitching, again, I'm always holding, pinching so that it doesn't come unthreaded, pinching that tail together. And I'm just going to move from the back to the front. You could go from the front to the back too, and just keep going from the back to the front, all the way around, just like that. Now I chose a color for my stitching that is gonna pop and show up on my blue, but you may decide that you don't want that stitching to show. So I made this little sloth buddy, and I used some brown thread so that it didn't show up, and then I used some of that brown thread to create some little moldy fur texture on him. But this guy I made, and I really wanted him to have kind of a cartoon outline feel, so I stitched him with some teal stitch because I wanted to see how that might look with the yellow. And you can also see I used some different colors to give him some freckles and to give him some little fur lines. He's kind of a funky little dude. Now I have not made it all the way around my buddy yet with my orange thread. I started here and I made it all the way up to ear number 1. The second orange piece of thread is hopefully going to help me get all the way to the other side, and I'm going to stop right about here so I have room to stuff in that stuffing. But notice that I'm running out of thread, and I want to stop before I get to the end of my thread because we're going to knot this off. When I cut my thread here to release my needle from my buddy, I do not want my whole thing to come unstitched, so we have to lock our stitch in place. So if you look at your stitches on the side, there's a special way to make a knot. I'm actually going to loop my needle underneath the last stitch that I made, and I'm going to pull that through, and then I'm going to do it again. I'm going to just wrap it around twice, and then I can pull that really tight. And I'll do it again, wrap it around 3 times, and then sometimes I like to just stitch it through. And when you have your little hole there, you can go right through the hole and pull it tight, and that's going to be a really nice knot there. So I looped underneath my last thread 3 times, and then I went to stitch 1 more time and I stuck it through the hole. So you might need to pause and back up to watch that a couple of times to get it. Now I'm going to pull my tail through, and then I can trim this. Okay, And I'll thread my orange thread and just keep going. All right, so now I've stitched starting here all the way around the edge of my buddy, and I'm stopping right here. So I have this little gap right here where I'm gonna open him up and stuff him. Now, if you wanna take your needle undone, that's fine. Make sure you put it somewhere where you're not gonna lose it. I'm gonna use a little scrap piece of fabric that I already used and just stick my needle on there so I can keep track of it. Okay, so now's the fun part where you're gonna use some of this fluff. Now this fluff looks really big, but it can squish down really, really tiny. If you have ever been to Build-A-Bear, you get to choose how much stuffing you want in your bear. So this is kind of the same thing. I'm just gonna decide as I go how much stuffing I want. I'm just gonna put a little bit in at a time because you don't wanna hurt your buddy. You don't wanna overstretch him. So now at this point, he's about halfway stuffed. I've got him stuffed to about here. I'm going to add some of my lavender. Smell his lavender vibes. So this could be a little messy, but I'm just gonna stuff into his guts lavender. The lavender tends to want to spill out, so I would definitely end with stuffing. So I put my lavender in the middle. It's kind of like his heart. Right, so I'm going to continue here. I stitched all the way. We stuffed in the lavender and the fluff, and now I'm just going to stitch that last little part to close the hole. So I'm going to have to rethread this needle that's hanging out and then close that hole. How you do the eyeballs is up to you. On this one, I just did a really teeny tiny stitch to make his little eyeballs. And on this one, I glued the eyeballs down. Now you're going to want to put a big glob of glue on there to make sure that it sticks. All right, so now that the glue on my little googly eyes are dry, my little buddy is ready to have a little friendship bracelet tied onto him. So I created a little friendship bracelet braid like this out of some of my embroidery thread. And I could use my needle if I want to stitch that onto the back. Just do a couple of loop stitching around it. And then I can tie this little buddy onto my backpack or my keychain or wherever I want to attach it. Now that's optional if you don't want to attach him, and maybe he's something that just goes in your winter coat pocket, so when you're feeling stressed you can pull him out and smell his sweet lavender smells. Or if you have something different hanging out around your house, like I had some of these, and I can wear this little guy as a little button on my shirt if I want to, or you can pin him onto your backpack or anything that you want. So there's lots of different ways that you can use your buddies to decorate things or just to have them to play with. So I'm gonna keep my buddy here. Your buddy that you made is yours to keep. And then the last thing that we're gonna do is pack up our box. So in our box, you're going to leave our little video tutorial paper, and then any of my extra thread that I didn't use I can send back. If you didn't use the googly eyes, you can stick those in there as well, and someone else will be happy to use them. So we want to recycle everything. So we've got that. Make sure that your lid is nice and tight on your glue. And then if you have any stuffing, which you probably do have plenty of stuffing left over, the next person can use it. So we'll stick our stuffing in there. If you didn't use all of your lavender, put your lavender in there. And I can reuse these baggies even if you used everything in them. So I put all of my scrap pieces. If you have some scrap pieces that you think someone else might want to use, you can stick them in there. If you have tiny pieces like these, you can just toss those in the trash. Okay, so I've put all my materials back in here. Don't forget your scissors. And then the very last thing that you're gonna put in there are your paper instructions, because I can reuse those. So I'm gonna put my paper instructions in order. I'm going to put them back in there, and then we'll return our box back to school at the time you selected when you reserved your box.